So now recording is in progress. So the webinar launched the upcoming special issue of the European Educational Research Journal, organized by Nelly Piatoeva, Gisa Virova, and me. And we would like to thank the authors who contribute to this special issue. And one of the papers is still under review. And thank them all for being here with us today with new and important insights about nationalism, populism, and education. Also another special mention to Esther Newman. She's also one of the authors of the special issue, and to thank her for the support to this webinar. So today we'll have 4 presentations, and we aim them to help us to discuss and to address 2 questions: how education reproduce nationalism, but also what nationalism do with education in terms of places, times, institutions, and actors. Paulo Landry will make the opening words of our webinar. He's a senior researcher at the National Research Council of the Institute of Research on Population and Social Policies in Italy. He's the lead editor of the European Educational Research Journal. Thanks, Paulo, for being here with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this presentation. As you know, I'm co-editing the journal together with Sotiria Grek from the University of Edinburgh. I'm very happy to be here and opening this webinar series. And thanks also to Esther and to Sofia, Jitka, and also Nelly for organizing this. I think the topic is very relevant, and so I will just say some few words as an opening speech for introducing, this interesting seminar. First of all, I would like to say some very brief consideration of the theme, how has been considered sociologically, and how the journal has addressed it. And finally, I will close with some statements on the European dimension of the issue that deserves, in my view, attention, since it will have no, in my view, episodic attention, and risk of being a threat to the overall process of making a common European space, not to mention the consequences regarding the reproduction of democracy in Europe and also elsewhere. On the first point, which is the seminar theme, that is to say, the return of the nation, I would say that there was a time in the recent past when the nation appeared outmoded. Since the 90s, the discourses and the dominant rhetoric have been aligned with the mantra of globalization, and the increasing interconnection between people, technologies, and spaces were at the forefront, while the boundaries, the closed space, and the nation states look like something destined to be put aside or something archived to the past. We know that the globalization has several aspects. It concerns the worlds of finance, economy, and communication. It tells a story of flow, mobilities, and relation between formerly unconnected spaces. Economically, it means the liberation of constraints and could be considered equivalent to liberalization from rules that permit the free circulation of goods and capital. Culturally, it means the acceleration of circulation of ideas, thanks to the new technologies of information and communication that allow a possibility of expanding their audiences at a long distance, and the uniformity of cultural conducts with increasing interferences of cultural models coming from other countries. Politically, globalization leads to the question of governance, how to govern a space outside the machine of the nation states. And here we have seen the creation of new areas of exchanges, development of agreement between states, leading to emergence of a new institution in between governments like the EU, development of transnational organizations like OECD and UNESCO, so crucial for the educational policy making, the unfolding on international global civil society, made by NGOs, leading to an intense network of projects and initiatives. We know very well how this has been important for education studies. Think, for example, how we are experimenting with a transnational turn in educational policymaking that is into the increasing role of transnational agencies in making education policy. This shift has also accompanied the need to develop new ways of studying education policy beyond methodological nationalism. As education becomes more global, even the investigation of education should have abandoned a narrow methodological nationalism to understand the current dynamics. If nation states was the main unit of analysis for education policy analysis in the era of globalization, it became essential to understand how the state changed its role. According to Bauman, for example, the state was assigned the role of gatekeeper, the one in charge of regulating the flow of circulating entities in the state, while in the past it had the task of the gardener, the one in charge of the cultivation of the nation. In that scenario, education became increasingly a global issue related to making a global society. In the past, education was seen merely as a nation state project. The extension of globalization is not uncontested, and so is the globalization of education. The promises of an increasing interconnections in terms of more democracy, a better economy, and new possibilities for more international and open education deal with its undesired effects. Increasing inequalities, domination of multinational companies in the states, widespread neoliberalism, the development of technocratic forms of government. Initially, the criticism of globalization have paved the way to the new global social movements, hoping for progressive-oriented globalization. However, more recently, it has tended toward nationalism and populism. An important passage was here the global financial crisis in 2008. According to political economy, this event has probably marked the crisis of the neoliberalism and the start of post-neoliberal interregnum, an uncertain historical period where a new hegemonic consensus has yet to be established. The risk of globalization raises doubts about its sustainability economically and ecologically, are forcing a return to the nation. COVID-19 pandemic is important in this history. We have witnessed the making up of a state of education emergency in which the global orientation has been suspended. The preoccupation about the population immunity took the lead and reinforced this trend. Confronted with the complexity of hybridity, a boundary crossing, the return to the nation embody a project of simplification and purification that needs the attention of sociological research and notably education studies. Considering the relevance of this issue, we welcomed and agreed to the proposal prepared and edited by Nelly Piattoeva, Jitka Virtova, and Sofia Viseu to develop a special issue on this subject. As journal editors, we think this subject deserves a lot of attention as it is not episodic and reveals complex dynamics that the globalization project has consumed for a long period. National and populism are explored also in other articles published by the journal. A search with the term nationalism leads to 123 articles, while the term populism, if you search with the terms, you will get to 46 articles. If we limit by searching nationalism and populism, you will get 24 articles, many of them published recently. Apart from the articles from the special issue edited by Nelly Piattoeva and the colleagues, I would like to mention another special issue on public education and also two articles, one from Anna Giudici named Seeds of Authoritarian Opposition, and the recent work of Gosia Klat called Resisting Europeization, Poland Education Policies and its impact on the European education area. I quoted these articles as, in my view, it introduces the last statement of my opening speech. These works help to understand that the European dimension of the nation return, and a judici explore historically a neglected aspect of this issue. That is how it is related to the right-wing extremism, radicalism, and populism that have emerged as transformative forces in European politics since 1980s. By focusing on Poland, Kosia-Klatt highlights the presence of de-Europeization policies beside the policy of Europeization that can be defined as a force to resist the EUization of education policies, which has been so far the dominant trend to the making up of a European education, to the making up of a European space of education. Both articles illustrate how nationalism and populism are now significant forces at the European level, destined to shape the direction of education policies in this regional space. Since in this perspective, it becomes clear how the return to nation is such an important topic to explore, and how the presentation of the articles of the special issue edited by Nelly, Gitka, and Sofia will help even more to understand the current dynamic of a trend that will require the attention of all the community of educationalists to investigate in details and from many points of view. Thanks for attention.
Thanks very much, Paulo, for your inspiring words and for these nice opening words for our webinar. So let's go to the presentations, and we'll start with the presentation by Carmine and Matthias from the Catholic University of Louvain. And the presentation follows, I think, the title from the paper, Interrogating the Nation in European Online Education. I will put the link for the paper, which is already online, for those who want to see it. And well, the floor is yours. Oh, and thanks again for being here.
Yeah, and thank you for introducing us. I will share my screen here. Let's see. Thank you. So indeed, our presentation has the title Interrogating the Nation in European Online Education, with the subtitle Topological Forms and Movements. Our contribution is developed by me as a PhD student and my PhD supervisor, Matthias de Kuiperen. We've built our contribution based on an empirical study on the Erasmus Plus virtual exchange, and particularly a format that's developed by the Sharing Perspectives Foundation. It is an online education initiative that is financed as a transnational activity by the European Commission, with the goal of stimulating cross-border exchanges. And how does this initiative do that? It sets up online exchanges between young people from European countries and from non-European countries, specifically those that are Southern Mediterranean countries in the European Neighborhood Policy. There are also students, or in that sense, participants that are not in universities. So there are particular prerequisites for joining, and that is mainly related to age and to the country of residence or nationality. Well, here we have already one link to nationalism, possibly. What also this initiative does is it sets up these exchanges about social political topics, including nationalism and including the borders of Europe and patriotism, all these kinds of social political concepts. So we see a couple of tensions related to nationalism in this initiative. On the one hand, trying to cross borders, on the other hand, reinforcing those borders through registration of the participants, because they have to be from particular countries, and still also discussing nationalism. So this sparked our curiosity about how this initiative relates to nationalism. In doing that, we had to develop a position and our position towards nationalism, and that came theoretically from the literature on social topology as well as critical border studies. And based on this literature, we define nationalism as a form of practice that is based on this idea of a single bordered flat topography. I illustrate this with this visualization. What we mean by that is, on the one, it's kind of makes this singular political state as a surface. You see that on the right side, a singular political state that's governing a singular people and also a singular geographical unit, and they are merged together. You can see that on the left side, merged together onto a kind of flat surface that erases the multiplicities of the different peoples, the history of the layeredness also of the different political units that are active. Also the different kinds of regions that are part possibly of a nation. So it kind of reduces the complexity and the multiplicity of what a nation is historically, or what we consider. On the other hand, nationalism is a form that can also be challenged or complemented by other forms, and we consider them topological forms and movements. And what do we mean by that? These are connections that are made beyond national borders, and that, for example, in online spaces or in political spaces like Europe, we can see them by one person connecting to another, or one thing connecting to another, and where kind of the geographical place is not so relevant anymore. For example, this online conference we joined together, and it doesn't matter where we are in the world, but we are here in this online conference. And we consider that something like that also happens in this online virtual exchange. But we're trying to examine what exactly happens there. And we did by going to a European university that integrated this virtual exchange into their curriculum. And for students, this meant that it was an alternative to their English language class. So usually they would go on campus to their English language class. Now they stayed at home, did their virtual exchange there. It was a whole course. And so they topographically moved. We considered that in this geographical unit, they moved, and they said, I can just do this at home because I can move my computer. But also topologically, they moved back and forth between this feeling of being here and connecting to it there, to those other people who are from other countries and from other places within their country. So one quote that illustrates this is that the student said, you don't live in the other country, you stay in your room, and when the session is over, you come back to your life. And this way, they compared it to an Erasmus experience, like a physical Erasmus experience, in which they would stay for a longer time in one place. This already shows that location is important. This further illustrated also when they talked about topographical references. So when they spoke about their fellow participants, they referred to the Finland girl or the guy from Syria. So they still merged kind of the person and the location, especially the nation, together. But on the other hand, they could also nuance that. So, for example, they said, maybe it's not a good representation of how people are living there, but at least it becomes possible to see how young people could feel in such a place. Again, the place is very important here. In the course, they were also challenged with the question, where are you local? To challenge, they were learning about nationalism, and they were being challenged, like, what is locality? And they said, okay, they started to reflect, I am in my university now, but I can also be local in my hometown, and it's within the same country. Or someone who said, I was born in South America and now I'm raised in France, and relating a continent to a country is also very, so they started to see the kind of multiplicity of regions and locality. And in that sense, what we see here is that topographically they're situated in different places and different localities, but also topologically, because they're connecting continuously to different places. So instead of being transnational, there's something translocal happening. When we connected to the teachers who were part of this university and who set up this initiative, they said also that they were continuously making connections with their students. On the one hand, topologically, because the students were not on campus and they were just having to grade their assignments without seeing them. So yeah, those were topological connections with their students. But on the other hand, they were also very much topographical, because their own work was still happening on campus. So one quote that illustrates this is that it's only that we sort of send them, the students, off on the virtual exchange or Erasmus, but as a teacher or administrator, all of this has a very local feeling to it. So again, this emphasis on locality and the connections across localities is being emphasized. And so that leads us to kind of what motivated this research was to interrogate how the nation as a kind of topographical form is continued through European discourse and policy and through online practice, not assuming that this creates a kind of borderless, denationalized space, that still this national form can be continued even online. So that was our initial motivation, and the responses we got from the empirical study is that these topographies are not erased, but they're interwoven with topological connections, and that this engenders the translocal as an alternative to the transnational, which is often emphasized in European policies regarding online education. So that is how I now kind of abruptly stop this presentation, but I think there will be room for questions, I think later, if I'm correct. So I hope this was enough of elaboration that inspires some discussions later and questions. I will stop sharing here.
Thank you very much for the presentation and to address one of the questions that Nelly and Jitka and myself were wondering, what motivated the research on the topic, and also addressing Paulo's need for more research on this. So thank you very much for that, and for the very well, you were really committed to the time, to the 10 minutes, and that's also great. Sure, we'll have time for questions after and for discussion. So we'll move on for the second presentation by Gita Virtova and Tomasz Barak, entitled Absence of Education in Civil Defense Education, Nationalism, Education and its Actors and Knowledge. So the floor is yours.
So good afternoon again, and thank you very much for being here, everyone. I will start this presentation of our paper by discussing few details about, and I would like to also ask you to read for more details in our article. We titled our article "Absence of Education in Civil Defense Education: Nationalizing Education, its Actors and Knowledges." We are from Institute for Sociological Studies from Prague, from Czech Republic. I hope that you can see the presentation moving, but I'm not sure. Yes, okay. So we are talking about civil defense education. Commonly across European countries, it is education which should protect, defend, and prepare and against some threats, actually to teach children how to be prepared and how to protect something against something. And obviously these threats are political issues. CDE, the civil defense education, has long history across European countries, but also has very interesting history.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we'll still see the first slide.
Really?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Can you see moving now?
No, Jitka, but what if you try to press that open book sign? Because that's sometimes the problem, that the mode doesn't work.
Now it's moving.
Yes, but I'm in my notes. Is it okay like this?
Yes.
Yes. Can you read it?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So thank you. So I will proceed like that. So again, back to the history of CDE. In many Western and Eastern and Central European countries, it is a really interesting history because CDE was re-ideologized for the purposes of communist regimes and also for purposes of Cold War. This interesting history meets, interestingly, the new threats posed by new ways of nationalism. So obviously, new times brings new threats, which is the political issue. On the other hand, it also interesting meet the local, historical, some heritages and path dependencies, which poses also some new duties on education. What was interesting in our case, that education was still a part of modern progressivism and nation building. Education was some leverage which should solve many problems, among them also the defense of the nation. What does it mean when threats meet education? Our case is not an object, not an easy object, it's a public debate. It is obvious, actually, it is fluid trajectory over time and space, which is sustained by variability of actors, variability of legitimations, ideological positions, and knowledges. The truth is that the proponents of the new civil defense education was, on the one hand, former communist proponents, together with newly established far-right proponents. This ideological mess was when far left and meets far right, was really interesting when they want together pose some duties on education. So there are variability of threats, variability of legitimations, and all these materialized in media. As Thomas will also explain in more detail, specific media run this debate. And as we followed our research, proper actors appeared, and also they bear some proper knowledge with them. We can say that the knowledge, the kind of knowledge they bear, also engaged other actors. So what does it all this means for education, which is claimed to be the solution for many threats, as was, for example, migrant crisis, terrorist attacks crisis, and others? So our methodological choices was media analysis. We have access to a really huge archive of media reports, and we used lemmatized words of civil defense and education. We try to understand this complex situation, this, as I call it, mess, ideological mess, and many actors and many knowledges through relational sociology, through relational ontology. We particularly based on Andrew Abbott's relational and processual sociology. It means that we take knowledge and education as connected. Nothing from this couple is set before. It is not given proper actors. It is not given which knowledge will be proper. Education in this entanglement of agency and education can bear many forms, and knowledge means that also can engage some other actors than in previously education was not present. How such an education should look like? Here we can see a picture from 2016. It's a shot from a movie directed by Adela Comer, and it was movie called Teaching War. Actually, this is allusion, not teaching civil defense education, but teaching war. We can see that there's some commonalities with former old communist civil defense education. We can see soldiers, we can see weapons and other things. What was the idea? Our idea is to introduce some kind of civil defense education in primary and secondary schools. In elementary school, 7th, 8th grades should start socializing properly to learn work in a team, to learn to respect team regulations or rules, to be able to obey team spirit, which unfortunately does not work at the moment. And in secondary schools for boys and voluntarily also for girls can go to practice. And for these people to be just a small step to join police forces, the army, as the firefighters or rescuers, but also those who would join the active reserves, soldiers reserves. Generally, to re-establish patriotism, responsibility, and teamwork again. What is interesting in this citation is this again. So for the proponents from the far right and far communist proponents, it was something which we should gain again, some patriotism again, some re-establishing again of something which should be good and should be done through education. This specific linkage between actors, far-right actors, communist actors, this stress on this kind of militarization obviously caused huge shock on the other side from the point of the liberal critiques of this CDE. This is detail which we'll discuss Thomas as well. So when we the case more in complex way, we can see many things on the first side, but we tried to understand it in our article. So not to understand specifically some ideological battles, whether far right is more right than far left, or whether this or this political issue is correct to education. We try to understand what does it mean for education, all these pushes to education. This slide is called "Where is education?" We can see education in the center. Sure, education was central object in all these debates. There were some threats to nation posed. Therefore, security experts appeared. This was the new thing. It was not only ideological battles, also the call for expertizing the legitimations, and also bring about some experts. And because the topic was threats to the nation, the expertise was security. And the bearers of this expertise were security experts. Anti-Allied populism. Those far-right proponents also wanted to be against Western, Allied, Brussels, and other. Children should learn patriotism through this education to be prepared against these threats to the nation. Military and security knowledge was this proper expertise to be used to legitimize and to prove these threats. Former communist proponents meet far-right proponents. This caused some liberal critique. All this is materialized through alternative far-right media. This was really the main site for all the proponents, for all the justification education. And it also caused cultural moral panics. We call it in our article double-sided moral panics. Thomas will speak about it more, because it was panics on both sides, on the liberal critic side and also on the proponent side. When we move to another slide, we can see slight change. And this is that education is not in central position as a subject, but it is object. Position in the political battle through governing of education was the main subject for all the battle. The education was placed during the debate in the position of service domain because of a kind of expertise which meet this legitimations of threats, the threats to the nations, brings about the sense that it is not rational to ask, for example, educational actors for advice. It was much more sensible to ask other military experts for expertise. So slightly, educational actors and educational knowledge ceased to be presented, ceased to be visible, ceased to be taken as a partner position. So all these elements stayed simply the same, almost slightly different, but the position for education changed. And this is the part of our main argument, that education simply was placed aside. Therefore, our article is called absence of education in civil education. Now I pass my voice to Tomáš, and he will introduce you with some more details.
I'm sorry, Thomas, can you make it in 3 minutes?
Oh, that will be partially hard. So
then we'll
I'm
have
sorry,
time.
Tomáš.
That's a big challenge.
Yes, but then
Yeah,
we'll have time.
let's give everybody equal time, so we also still have time for discussion.
Yes, sorry.
Okay, thank you, Nelly and Sofia. Thank you, Ika, for passing the floor. And according to your time zone, I wish you a good afternoon or good evening. And firstly, thank you for the opportunity to share the ideas of our research in such an interesting scientific community. As Itka said, one of the aspects with which we conducted our research was the debate on the concept of civil defense education in the media, specifically in the so-called alternative media, which some authors define as a media which producing far-right views, or as a media partially collaborating with the disinformation scene. In our case, this media became the space in which specific proponents of civil defense education created panic and the need for its return to the educational curriculum from the communist era. This appeal was primarily evoked by the actors who framed Czech society and primarily children as unprepared for certain social risks or dangers, ranging from war reactions to a terrorist attack or to behavior in the event of fire. It should be noted here that the debate or public debate was ideologically very mismatched, as it was said, and it was here that it was fundamentally identified the link between nationalism and populism in the sense of the need to protect the Czech Republic, Czech people, or Czech nation from an external danger that was largely framed against specific external factors. We consider this aspect to be one of the case stimuli of our research, which was carried out by analyzing the media reports, as it has said, and also 6 most frequently featured political actors across political parties. Next slide, please. Thank you, Itka. As I've already noted, the arguments for legitimizing the reintroduction of civil defense education into schools have been most notable outside the traditional media. The media did not focus directly on education in this matter, but the actors speaking on the topic of civil defense education, there were primarily actors posing as experts from the security and military sphere, for example. As a rule, this need was complemented by the need to defend, for example, traditional conservative values, typically against migrants in several years ago. At the same time, this was opposed by, as Ika said, the liberal critics of civil defense educational concept, which pointed to the risk of militarizing schools as an environment of freedom, for example. And that you can see the specific picture of with a soldier in a school at the beginning of the presentation. At the same time, it focused on the need to defend children from fake news, the part of liberal critic, from fake news, or to encourage them to participate in some organizations as a citizens, for example. But however, this appeal was not made. This was also not made in this case either by representatives of education, but primarily by representatives of various non-profit organizations. And in both cases, liberal and conservative, education had the role of service manager who would achieve the readiness or preparedness of children for the specific goals that I was talking about. I know that the time running out, so please 1 or 2 minutes, please, Sophia. Next slide, please. To brief summarize, it's possible to say that although the context and the actors discussing of the topic civil defense education have changed over time, also to a lesser extent of the former or current Ministry of Defense in Czech Republic. But and also arguments that should legitimize the need of civil defense education have remained the same. At the same time, these arguments could be framed as a populist or nationalist with the aim of fabricating education, but specifically without educational actors, so without representatives of Ministry of Education, school directors, and teachers who did not participate in the media debate at all. Next slide, please. Thank you. And finally, we have to say in final of our research, the political and ideological struggle, which we were talking about, was framed as something would have to be solved by education, by educational nature, as a service agency, for example, with educational knowledge, but without educational actors. This is one of the most particular or important thing from our research. So I have a last sentence. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Jitke and Thomas. I'm sorry for the pressure on the time, but let us see if we have still time for questions and answers. So thank you very much for your presentation. I added the link for your paper on the chat, so every details can be found there. So we can move on now to Nelly, Edith, and Valeria presentation, the politics of language, the case of national examinations in English in Russia. So the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you also to every participant who came here to launch this special issue with us. We were actually very much looking forward to have an ECER conference presentations on this papers in progress back then, a couple of years ago, but unfortunately that didn't happen. So this is the long-awaited conference format. So yeah, our paper, I'm trying to be also very brief, give you more like a trailer and invite you to read the paper in full. It has been published. So in this paper, we looked into a very interesting case of national examinations in the case of Russia. And Iris, you can already put the next slide. We were working, first of all, against this idea that national large-scale assessments that have been spreading across countries and have usually been perceived in policy research as some kind of global educational idea or a global practice that now is adapted across nations and is a kind of manifestation of globalization. We referred actually to some other research, also including my earlier work with Nadezhda Vasilieva, where we're trying to see national large-scale assessments as also an instrument that actually is helping to reproduce nationhood. So it's not just an instrument of convergence and globalization, but actually it gets adapted in national context and actually also helps to reconstitute state-centric nationhood with this kind of added tools in the toolbox of governments. Next slide, please, Iris. And in this paper, then we are discussing several theoretical and contextual elements. So first of all, we are discussing, of course, the idea of nationalism and nation, not as something that exists historically, but something that is reproduced importantly through formal education, and that is reproduced both discursively, but also through different material means, such as policies and such as testing in particular. So it actually matters a lot, for instance, in which language mandatory testing is taking place in countries where several minority or state languages exist. Then we are also connecting to discussions about this relationship between nation and language. So the idea also that nations somehow are connected through and represent linguistically uniform communities, of course, is something that is a product of historical and political processes. So we are also kind of critically revisiting this debate and trying to show also how through testing this link between national language and nationhood is also actively reproduced. And we are also connecting to these critical debates on globalization, internationalization, and English language, because there is this kind of, on the one hand, idea that English language is a kind of proxy for internationalization and globalization, but also as Taina Saarinen, a Finnish scholar of higher education, has put in her papers, we are increasingly seeing this discourse of English as a killer language. That is actually something that is sort of dangerous for national languages to endure and survive. And so in our paper, we are then kind of looking at these discourses on the one hand related to national language, which is Russian, but also then linking how these different ideas of Russian language as mother tongue, as state language, also have an impact on how the role of English language itself also gets kind of changed historically in the past 10, well, in recent history in the past 10 years. And just quickly, next slide. So basically, why we got really interested in English language? Well, first of all, there is not so much research on looking at the effects of nationalism and national reproduction on foreign language education. So usually this kind of the linguistic side of nationalism and education is more discussed through national language, mother tongue, or minority languages. And then also in the context of Russia, it was really interesting that there was a decade-long debate on whether or not to have English as a compulsory third subject in the national large-scale assessment. So in addition to Russian and math. And in these 10 years, the debates have changed a lot, as you will see soon. And finally, the decision was made not to add English as a third compulsory language. So we thought this is a really interesting period to look at in terms of how the debate has evolved in media outlets. And also in parallel, there were many changes, important changes happening in the federal standards of education, from looking at English as a kind of tool for intercultural and multicultural exchange, to then looking at it as an important linguistic kind of technical skill to translate the values and ideologies of Russia to the world. So also in this kind of different context, it was interesting then to see sort of how languages, debates on Russian, debates on English, and various changes in the reforms, the policies of education, how kind of those were iterated in the public debate on the examination. And now moving over to Irish.
I'm having a problem with slides not wanting to move every now and then. So like I press and they don't go.
Now you moved to another direction.
But in my screen, I still have your slide on. So I just quit a quick sharing just for a second.
Yes, maybe you should do that. Stop sharing and then share again.
What if I share and then you just continue and I will do the job of sharing?
Well, maybe it works. I don't know what's happening, but yes, let's try that. Sorry for this. Okay, so very quickly about the data. So the data was collected by Valeria for her master's thesis, and it consisted of 50 news pieces collected from 3 of the main Russian media outlets. And one might ask, why would we use media data in this case? And so we departed from a Luhmann idea that the media is the main medium for the people to get informed about events in the world. And the media actually performs a double reduction of complexity, of the world complexity, first by bringing to the public certain topics or themes instead of others. And second, by framing these topics in specific ways. So we then used frame analysis as our analytical tool and identified 3 sub-themes and 2 main frames. So along the time frame considered, the two frames were on one hand the one supporting the argument, supporting the national examination in English becoming mandatory, and the other one was of course against. From this analysis also, there was a series of themes that were identified, or sub-themes in this case. One was related with education, questions regarding curriculum, pedagogic expertise, and so on. The second regarding with society, for example, questions related to inequalities. And finally, regarding identities, so concerns regarding Russia's national global interests or the characteristics of the national identity. So now I pass, I think, to Valeria.
Yeah, thank you, Iris. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, very well.
Good. Well, here you can see our main findings. In the article, we argue that all the changes we can observe in the frames related to the idea to introduce the unified state exam in English as a mandatory test paralleled the changes in the rhetoric and nation building and language policy. The discussion on the benefits the obligatory testing in foreign language might entail indicated that actually Russia did want to be a global actor and partner. So the English language was considered by Russian authorities as an efficient and important tool for making the country part of the global economic and political community. But later, with the shift of the state priorities towards the national, English started to be seen as a threat to national identity and even to national security, and in particular as a threat to students' mastery of the Russian language. Next slide, please, Nelly. And here we can see one of the most illustrative, I would say, examples of the shifts which I have just mentioned. What this binary of Russian language and English language looked like and how it emerged in the debate. Well, references to the national aspects of education started to outweigh those that referred to international community. And such school subjects as the Russian language, literature, and history started to be regarded as nationally relevant subjects. So a stark opposition between the studies of Russian language and culture and foreign language education emerged in the curriculum. Thus, compulsory testing in the English language came to symbolize excessive foreign influences and even was blamed for consuming time and resources necessary for the subjects which promote the ideas of national identity. And again, it's about the Russian language, literature, and history. So this debate was, of course, widely discussed and presented in the mass media. And next slide, please.
Yes, I think that it's good to finish now. This is, of course, anyways, the conclusion, but what we wanted also to say is that it's really hard to talk about the return of the nation, because we think that the nation has always, throughout this 10-year debate, was present somehow, you know, as an actor or as a benefiter somehow of English language or national languages. But in the beginning, the nation was more presented as a kind of something that is in companion with, you know, some other actors with whom then Russia should be more in contact with and connected to. And we see more and more kind of isolationist and anti-Western discourses of Russian nation then towards the end of the period. And of course, now with the invasion, we see kind of those discourses also being reiterated in many other domains as well. And the other maybe quickly thing to say is that we also want to highlight that this policies of foreign language education and also testing in different subjects must also be studied from this political question, and also as tools of national reproduction that are then linked and also changed through changes in state ideologies and different prerogatives that education is expected to serve. So thank you, and also we invite you to read the paper as well.
Okay, thank you for the great presentation. I've also added the link for the journal and the article that is already online for those who are interested to read. Now let's move on to the last presentation. Zsuzsa Milei, inspired by La Palaine. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm guessing everybody's getting tired. For me, it's now 7 o'clock in the evening after a day of work. So apologies if I just ramble on. So thanks for the invitation to the special issue and also to this forum. And since we had to start with our concerns, so I developed a paper from those issues. And we worked together with SIRPA for a few years now, actually. And in this paper, we wrote about nationalism together. But in this paper and in this, few years, we were really concerned about the climate, and we wanted to bring the two concerns together. So maybe I move to the next slide, which is not working. Yes. Do you see the next one? Yes, perfect. So we were very much concerned with the climate, heating and biodiversity loss, need for a new type of politics for education that engenders our interdependence with ecologies that sustain our life. So there is a lot written about this already in education, and we also read the Commonwealth Collective's ideas, which are falling very closely to our side. But we were very much interested in the nation, right? How the nation plays a role in something that is unfolding such a broad extent to the world. And we started to think that, since modern education is tied to the nation, it socializes children into the structured national subjecthood based on human sociality. It is kind of an easy way in to think of the nation as something that is already exclusivist in this sense, right? Because it doesn't include all the other beings, such as, as others try to include. And here I quote Donaldson and Kimlicka, Zoopolis, they are trying to include animals into society. Or there were others who wrote about the legal personhood of rivers, forests, or mountains. Or instead, or people are starting to think of bioregions instead of nations. So there are alternative imaginaries to this nationhood. And our question was, how to work this into kind of on this intersection of nationalism, nature, and childhood, because we are working with early childhood education mostly. I give it to you for now.
Yeah, thank you. Well, basically, the data was generated by Zsuzsa in Kurri Preschool in New South Wales in Australia in the period on 2013 and 14, and with the focus of child placemaking, and we started to analyze the data with new theoretical lenses and with new questions. And our questions were, how can our educational imagination go beyond the nation, global planet, and human exceptionalism towards dwelling on Earth, towards local biological and biospheric dependencies? And second, how can we transform the basic concepts and institution of industrial nation-state modernity, life, social identity, belonging, learning, pedagogy, etc.? And what could an earthly politics, referring to Latourian idea of Latour, meaning that politics which is not based on national or global interest, but of the interest of Earth. And then they asked, how can we reconceptualize the human or child as earthling for education? And now,
yes, thank you. So let's just show you a few things. We are not trying to go through the whole paper because I don't think we have enough time here. One of the fundamental question, right? When in the previous slides, we talked about this green modernity, right? That it is impossible to rethink our relations if we are not starting with the basic concepts. And one of the concepts that we were starting with is kind of childhood, nature, education, nation. So we were playing, and this was a very long process. You can imagine how to bring all this together into one frame. And you know, we started with childhood. So we usually imagine the child as part of a society, which is like social relations. So what if we, for this new type of politics, when we are not just thinking of nation as a human sociality, we bring the view of childhood in this as a different kind of relations, not just with other people, but also besides realizing that besides cognition, there is a body that we are, which is a thing of flesh and blood, exercising certain respiratory and metabolic functions. So how to create this, or how to bring in this different idea of childhood and work it together with nation. So we borrowed from Margulis, who is talking about a holobiont, which is not just you know, human cells, but also microbial cells, as you see on the picture. So it's a multi-species in itself. And we thought of this relationality immediately breaks this societal relationship and brings something more into the discussion. So we started to think of child ecology and how this child ecology leads a life in a kind of an ecology, which could be the school, which could be multiple ecologies meeting in schools. So what does happen with alliances in this way? Because now we could think of education not as an alliance to the nation, but maybe we could think of alliance to other regions, other environmental contexts that help us lead our lives in these ecologies. Yep. So this was, and I said that we continued with other notions that are creating binaries such as culture and nature and, you know, nation and globalization. And as Latour talks about, you know, he also connects these concerns that we had about the climate and about this increasing nationalism, but also he argues that globalization is something that, of course, we can take it in a positive side, which I think during the 1990s that also Paulo was talking about was a very hopeful ethos, right? That through internationalization, globalization, we can create kind of a multiverse there, but soon, you know, this nation kind of hijacked this idea, and this is specifically because what Latour talks about, this provincialization of globalization, which narrowed down globalization to economic interests and global financial markets and so on. So it was basically carrying a very few who were privileged, perspectives of a very few who were privileged to benefit from it. And he says that because of this break in sort of this neoliberal globalization, people started to turn to the nation, right? And I think that was also Paulo, what he was talking about, how we turn to the nation because we felt that it gives some protection around this neoliberal globalization. However, this protection is a value that is not really beneficial for us in our current crisis. And others also today explain that how populism sits next to this and so on. So Latour is looking for another attractor. So it's not nation, it's not the global, even if it's in the positive sense, but he wants to land on earth, right, which would be another attractor. And here, this is this very thin layer of the earth that he calls a critical zone that sustains life, which is the soil, basically, and a few kilometers of air. So I stop here, but the idea of Latour, I'm not what I wanted to say, but what we wanted to do is take first educational imaginaries, because a lot what we have in education actually portrays this idea of the world that we are separated from. And when you see these imaginaries, such as the one behind here on the globe, is kind of position us that we are looking from nowhere, like we were not dependent on this soil and critical zone. So this is very important to tackle in education if you want to shift this national view or these global images that dominate our imagination, because representations of the world are also political sites. And these politics emerge from how we see and how we learn to see, how we suppose the world works, how we suppose that it matters, and what we feel we have a stake in it. It is an implicit everyday metaphysics, the bold speculations buried in our ordinary life. So then I explained the child, you know, so how we reconnect this child with the world. And here we found Cobb's ideas from 1977, very inspirational. She's kind of looking at like this originally sensations and understandings of the child to connect to the world, how to understand it. And we thought that these kind of originally or genetically motivated processes of learning, as she talks about, like this first ways of navigating in life, could be really interesting to start with in education. And this is what we also try to do for ourselves as well as researchers. And we try to look at this data anew with this kind of attunement to earthbound ecology. So what this data can reveal if we are looking at it from our senses of being embedded in, or, you know, indwelling in this world. So we found this as a research method too, and we try to rewrite the data in poems to recount these sensations and emotions and to orient towards this earthly politics. And I don't want to do the analysis, but this was one of the data that we started with. This is a child who is talking about this blue circle is my world. The green part is Australia, where I live. The anchors are holding on to the world because there is rubbish on Australia. The world is supposed to move slowly, but it is moving really fast to get rid of all the rubbish. So the anchors have to hold it in place and only the rubbish will fly off. So what you can see here in a 5-year-old child's worldview is already this separateness, already looking from somewhere else, and already this technological fix that we are hoping will save us from the climate heating. So this is what we try to reread. And I just show you, and I'm finishing. Thank you very much your attention. So this is the analysis on the left-hand side, and then the new kind of story that we speculatively written through our own imaginaries. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for a great presentation. So we still have 15 minutes for questions and answers. I would invite the authors to go to the chat, because many of you already made some questions in there, and maybe we could start by there. Zuza, you were the first one to address a question, so to Carmins, right?
Yes, I just wanted to know how the this topological view helps her or them understand nationalism in a way that possibly is not possible with other theories.
Yeah, I think what is important and useful in topological thinking is that it's kind of disentangles, and by addressing it as nationalism as a form, it also allows to see how it can be deconstructed. I think the visualization that I showed with the multiple layers and the other visualizations I did not really address yet, but it shows how it's a very, very unique form, nationalism, and by also in education showing how this is nationalism and how something else is not nationalism, it can really also allow to challenge it, showing complexities, layeredness, shifts, things like that. So I think it's also really good question. Thank you for pointing that out and allowing me to elaborate on that.
Thank you for the question and the answer. And then Jucha, you also asked Gita and Thomas. So Thomas and Gita, do you want to address the question?
Oh, thank you very much, Zsuzsa, for this question. And I tried already to answer in the chat, but I can read it again. We draw on the great discussion of Decline and Stavrakakis with Brubaker, that nationalism is a kind of a repertoire, always new and always established in a particular situation. And in our case, we try to show that this particular situation was in what some historical heritages of communist proponents who were really critical for some critics. On the other hand, from external pushes to have education as evidence-based, to justification have evidence based on expertise. And this together creates situation that all these calls or these duties posed to education simply stressed so much the expertise about proving what is the threat, what is the proper threat, or what is the proper solution, that the education simply ceased to be important. The educational expertise ceased to be important. It was not any kind of domination or force or some aggressiveness. It was simply not reasonable to ask them for their opinions, for their expertise. It was not in that current state of national cause for education. It doesn't make any sense to participate with teachers, participate with directors, to ask, even not to ask state officials responsible for education. They were silent because they, from one interview, we know that they were silent because they were in fear to be placed with some duties. Which were for them external, because they were not pedagogical. There was some from military expertise. So this is the interesting thing which we trying to show, that always it is embedded in a specific situation, and the way of the nationalism are always new.
Okay, thank you. Thomas, do you want to add any comments?
No, I think it is far from it.
Okay. Thank you for the questions and the answers. Then we have Katrin. You wanted to ask something to Carmins, right? You want to address your question?
Sure, Karen. First of all, thank you for all the insightful presentations. I would have other questions, but I'll save them for later, perhaps by email. But Carmina, it was just a thank you. I just wanted to hear a little bit more about how do you think if this is context of online education is somewhat specifically bringing up these topological connections, and how would they perhaps be a case of Europeanization? I don't know if you're able to follow my question.
Yeah, thank you. So I think indeed you addressed the conflation of the online and the European, which are both kind of are within this imaginary of countering nationalism because they cross borders. And I think these topological connections, indeed, what you say, that are being created through online education. What I try to show is that it allows not only to connect different countries, but also different locations, and especially for persons like young people being able to see, oh, this is going on in that other place and in that other place, instead of taking a map and saying, okay, this is one country within Europe and that is another country within Europe, and though there are different people in those countries, but more seeing, oh, there's another person there's another person within a particular situation there, and that's by introducing that into, I think, European education, there is another kind of Europe really being made that is not just the sum of its parts as it tries to, or some of its member states, but also really creating different connections. Of course, this is like very much like ideal, or that also how Europe tries to portray its ideal. Of course, there's still this continuation of topographical maps and ideas of people and exclusions, but it's something that can happen with online education. So thank you for that question.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I should ask the audience, someone who didn't address the questions in the chat, there's still a chance to make the question, so you just can raise your hand or something. We have another question by Judith to Jitka and Thomas. Judith, do you want to address the question?
Yes, I can see it in the chat. Tomasz, do you want to answer this question, for example, or is it?
If you want, you can start it. I can conclude it.
Okay. The question is about changes and differences from socialist to post-socialist concepts of nationalism related to education. Thank you for this question again. The interesting thing is the role of the state, especially in Czech Republic, which is not something which is really common in every Central or Eastern European country. What we tried to show and what we find out is that the role of the state was not the main bearer of what should education do. Just because of this circle that the expertise was military and security, which brings about these actors who were far right or far left. Just because of this, the role of state was silenced, but not, as I said previously, not by any aggressive move, but by the rationalization from different point of the view. It was not relevant to address the state, to participate with the state. It was relevant, it was rational to pose some duties on state. In this sense, I would say that it is not quite the common sense of socialist country, which was this, in which the state is a strong actor. In this sense, it could be post-socialist. On the other hand, it still have many connections to the previous historic heritages. This kind of nationalism, which was present in education in Czech case, shows that it is not only external push for expertise. It is not only pushes from new threats or new ways of nationalism, or just that the state was irrelevant. It is also connected to historical heritages. It can't be simply thought as different things. This was also the reason why we incorporated the relational ontology, because it is related. That the state was weakened also by the thing that there was some specific historical heritages of communist legacy to civil defense education. So I hope that I answered the question. Thomas, what do you think?
On the short debrief, I think the most differences can be that in the history, in the communist era, there was not only but mainly one danger. There was danger from West, from United States against the war or nuclear attack, for example, according to history. But now there we can see huge package, for example, of potential dangers from actors from security or army sphere, from unpreparedness of children or young generation across the attack or danger people in a school or in a street, for example, external to fire to some danger of everyday life, of your everyday lives, for example. It's partially shamey from that is maybe partially unconcrete danger, according to, for example, emergency of traditional values, because it's a very, very huge problem for this, mainly because in our case, in our media case, it was mainly conservative proponents, and they legitimize that from this point of view.
Okay, thank you, Dudka and Thomas. Nelly, you also had a question. I saw it on chat.
Yeah, I was already asking it on chat, but I just wanted to contextualize it a bit more, because I was really fascinated by this whole notion also of how nationhood, nationalism is so anthropocentric, right? And at the same time, how the nation also nationalized nature. So like for me, that was a whole new layer that you have introduced in your paper. But also I'm thinking in which way, because now I think we debate a lot about like why we know the climate crisis is happening, why we know and we are not doing. Not enough is happening, right, on the government level, on the individual level. So I'm also wondering if the way how the nation has been, the nature has been nationalized, also maybe has something to say, or has some kind of plays a role in which we are still in this kind of impasse in terms of climate policies. But I don't know, this is very speculative, of course, but if you want to address in some ways, I see you're already writing on chat.
Yeah, but just quickly, as I said, I think that this imaginary of how we understand ourselves as separated is already coming in very, early in education. And I think without rethinking that, this primary force of socialization to the nation, to the, family, to the, Finnish nature, it will remain. So that's why we started to go deeper and deeper and deeper, because we always felt that you need to rethink that for that, you need to rethink that for that, and now you again need to rethink that for that, right? So that's why it's very important that we have to kind of trouble all the modernist conceptualizations and divisions that modern education and mass schooling is kind of hinging upon. A nation is one part of that.
Mm-hmm. So in a way, I feel like in your paper, like not only kind of nature had to step back and give way to nation as a kind of primary object of education, but then nature also became nationalized and became like another object of extraction, so that nation can progress and can endure and flourish. So there are kind of all these different layers in which nature is kind of, yeah.
Very well said, thank you.
Sorry, but it was a really, that's why we also wanted to have your paper last, is that we felt that this whole kind of going beyond the human-centric debate on the nation was so powerful and really noble. Okay, Sophia, over to you, I think.
Well, we are running out of time. We just have 1 minute left. Now, if you want to address Matthias' comments in 1 minute.
5 seconds. I know, Matthias, do you want to say it also, or? Because you
No, not really. I more or less included everything I was thinking about in the chat. It just made me think your presentation about what now exactly do we call a nation? What is a nation? It is, as we know from this research and from our special issue, but equally from decades of research about this. But it's really not so easy to answer. Like, the easy answer is it stops with the boundaries of the nation state, but that's just a circular way of reasoning. And to really nail it down with everything we have seen in the chat, I don't think we are entirely there yet, because it is about and language and culture and what we imagine it to be and pragmatics and juridical things, but it's equally about a lot of other things. And I find it super interesting to just think about, like, for instance, with the paper that we have tried to make the distinction between what is national, what is international, what is transnational, what is translocal, all this sort of things. These are super hard questions. And if you would ask to me, is Europe a country? I think I would be inclined to say yes, even though we don't really share a language, but we share so much. And yes, it is constructed and is so much politicized and so much under attack, but at the same time, maybe not for all people in Europe, but as a people, I think we more or less form a nation. But that argument, I would not know how to make that based on my knowledge about how we think about nationalism, internationalism, transnationalism, and so on. And I was just, with your presentation, I was thinking about, because in Russia, the case that you made was so much focused on language as the unitary thing that unifies the nation. And what I try to put in the common box is that in Belgium as a nation, this is the thing that is first and foremost not there in order to form us as a nation. And what is then the nation? Is it then Flanders or Wallonia? Because those are the imagined communities, but at the same time, they're very real and they're not pragmatic at all. On the other hand, I think not a lot of, well, some people, maybe many people, but not all people would say that Flanders is a nation or that Wallonia is a nation. But which criteria do you use in order to do that? I think that is a pretty important thing to still think further on. And that was a bit what I tried to make clear in the comment box. So, but as I said, it's more a comment than really a question. It was just something that made me think based on your presentation.
Yeah. Well, I think in the Russian case, just very quickly, we can see also how this relationship between language, right, and what is considered as a glue of the nation also changes. So I think that that's also what makes this whole question of how education reproduces nations and how nations as, you know, political constructs, for instance, make use of education is a kind of an ongoing debate, because I think it's so much placed in space and time and changes like the content of what is considered our, you know, characteristics of our nation or something. I think it flows somehow, it's not static. So that's why I think nations do not exist kind of historically as static entities, but they are an ongoing construct, and they don't necessarily have to have state boundaries, because there are so many groups that might want to imagine themselves as nations. But I hope we can somehow return to this debate, and these are also important questions for us as editors to I think, revisit also in the introduction. So actually, thank you everybody for questions and comments on chat, and also in voice, because they give us very amped food for elaborating in the introduction. So
Yes.
over to you, Sophia, to close the.
Yes, just thank again for our authors, for the audience. Thanks for Paulo Landrit for being here, to Esther Newman for all the help to prepare the web seminar. And we hope to see you all very soon in Glasgow, or even sooner in the next webinar from the network on the 5th of May. Thank you all for being here, and see you soon, we hope. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you to all. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I wonder who is recording, Sophia.